Why some clients pay more in taxes than others? The answer to that question will surprise you. It is not what you think. Hi folks, my name is Julian Gonzalez. I am one of the founding members here at Upfront CPA. Today I wanted to talk to you about that very question, okay? You may be in a situation where you are very, very similar to someone you know, to perhaps another colleague that runs a similar business to what you have, and you expect to have similar results, but it turns out that your tax situation is very different, okay? And what I want to achieve today, it's one of my goals, is to kind of just put that thought into your head to get you to think about some of the things that you should know that will kind of help you answer that question and can put you in the right direction, okay? And it's very simple. So two clients can make the exact same amount of money, okay? They can be working with a CPA, even the same CPA, and still have completely different results, okay? So this is almost like hard to believe, but this is the reality, okay? One will pay significantly more than others. So, maybe it could even be slightly different, but still the difference will surprise you, okay? And most people will assume that the reason for that is the CPA, but it turns out that the reality is that it's not always the CPA's fault, okay? The reason can be more profound than that, okay? And basically that happens because the CPA with your accountant, the relationship that you have is a two-way street, okay? I'm just gonna be blunt here and just tell you the reality, how it is. And in this relationship, the fruits that comes out of that labor comes out of the communication, the presence, the amount of work, and the availability that you have with your CPA. Both ways, okay? It's not gonna work if, for example, you're in a situation where when your CPA needs you, you're nowhere to be found, or when you want to talk to your CPA, it's all of a sudden out of the blue when you didn't plan to meet with your CPA. So these are all the type of things that high level that I want to discuss today, okay? That relationship with your CPA and how can that have an impact on not only the process itself, of the tax processing, or in the tax, whatever situation you're in, whether it's advisory, whether it's change of CPAs, whether it's your filing at the end of the year. To make that process work, there has to be a communication, there has to be a trust, there has to be a two-way street process that you have to establish with your CPA or with your accountant, okay? The difference between those two, right? When I talk about, I have two very similar people, maybe even running the same business, in the same industry, having very different results when it comes to their taxes, how much they're paying, the process that they go through to get this done. When it's very different, it all comes down to the relationship that you have with your CPA, the approach that you take when you with your finances, and how you work that finance process with your CPA. I've seen this over the years, okay? When I started, I used to think that I was gonna be this the CPA that was gonna close the gap between what I always heard from other clients. Well, my CPA doesn't answer the phone. My CPA, when I look for him, is nowhere to be found. When I started this firm, I said I was gonna be the solution to that problem. And to some extent, as much or as good as a CPA that you can be, this is a two-way street. So you can only do so much from your part as an accountant, as a CPA, to get things done, right? But it also comes down to how the client approaches this process and what they're able to do with their finance, with how they do their bookkeeping, how they do the accounting, how they do their bookkeeping, how they file everything, how they take that approach will inevitably affect the situation. So just to give you an example, right? If you have a CPA that is willing to work with you, that wants to meet with you regularly, but if the client doesn't need it, they have the time but doesn't have the, let's say, the motivation to do this, then it's no good what you can do as a CPA to get this done when it's not reciprocal. Okay, so high level, what most people think taxes are about how much you make. Okay, that's what most of us think immediately. How much I'm gonna pay in taxes? It's directly associated with the amount of money I make. Okay, and the truth is, it's not just about income. Income is just part of the equation. This is a whole process. Okay, and I'm not sitting here with you just to make things complicated so that you don't understand it, so that you hire a CPA. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be realistic to you so that you know that there are different pieces on the board, and how you approach it as the client when you talk to your CPA will have an impact on how this is done. For you realistically to think that you're just gonna be completely separated from the situation, and it's gonna be handled, it's really not realistically something that is gonna benefit you, especially in the long run. Okay, now that doesn't mean that you may not be able to hire somebody to take care of all of that for you. That's different. I'm not saying that you have to personally take care of this, that relationship with your accountant or your CPA. What I mean is that at least you should have someone that can take charge, that can be that person that will handle that process for you, that can be communicative, that can be present, that has the time to either answer, meet, talk to your CPA, look for strategies, and it's hopefully someone that has at least some tax or financial background that can really help you in all the areas of the business, because this is key. Okay, when you think about taxes, you think that it's one aspect, but really, when you develop that relationship with your advisor, you're really looking at the business as a whole. Because really, taxes is everything related to finance. Anything can have an impact on your taxes, whether it's your part, the income part, whether it's the expense part, whether it's payroll. All of that kind of comes into the final piece, which is the financial statements that you have, or your financial outcome, and all of that can play a part into how much you're gonna end up owing in taxes. Okay, so taxes are about how you structure things, right? Starting from how you set up your business. That's number one. Okay, so that's kind of like when you step up to the bat. That's the first thing that will set you up for the future. Okay, so we've seen this. Like, I can never underestimate this or overstate this enough. Is how you start the business will have an impact, especially down the road. If you start on the wrong foot, if you don't set up the type of structure that you need, if you set up, let's say, a type of a tax category that doesn't apply to you, all of these are things that are gonna just slow you down, or at the very least become an inconvenience down the road. So the best thing is just to set your mind on what you want to do. That doesn't mean that there may not be changes, because you may have things can change, right? Things can adjust, but it is important to at least have the right foundation and the proper structure, so that if those things come that you may have to adjust, at least you have the foundation to set up the pieces so that it doesn't have, let's say, a negative impact where it turns out, for example, that you had the wrong structure to begin with, and now you have to maybe even go back to set up a new business or set up a new LLC because you didn't have the right structure. So that's number one, right? When you make decisions, right? The timing of things. So that's why talking to your CPA regularly is key. what that does is it sets up the timing so that you're able to make the decisions when you have the options to do it. As you may hopefully have spoken with your CPAs or your accountants, there are certain limits of time that you have to make certain decisions, whether it's set up the category that you need. For example, an S Corp has a certain amount of days during the year that you have to make the change so that it's available that year, so it becomes effective that year. That you also have to pick the effective day, at which day begins. There may be some component there that you need to look at, because if you pick during the year, after the year passed, let's say somewhere in the middle, you may have two different tax responsibilities prior to that, during the year and after. So is it really January 1st? Was it during the year? All of these are timing decisions that if you meet with your CPA regularly during the year, prior to year end, it's gonna help you. It's gonna at least set you up so that you guys are able to communicate together, to bring up the strategies together, so that you may be able to do what's right, good, beneficial, and profitable for the business at the time you're able to do it. This is the number one conversation I have with prospective clients when they come in and they meet with me. Okay, so we go through a whole process of a conversation, right? We discuss, we talk, we converse, we discuss, mainly what's your relationship with your CPA. If you're unsatisfied with the service, what happened there? Where's the break? How did you communicate? Those are all things that will help us also determine how we can help the client, how we can bring in some value, because that relationship is important. Okay. So how you manage your finances throughout the year, right? So this goes back again to the timing and the whole thought process. Do you discuss, like, if you have an expense, if you have some equipment to buy, do you talk to your CPA and discuss it before, or do you go ahead and you make that purchase, and after the fact, or even worse, when you go file your taxes is when you disclose this information, right? So managing your finances along with your CPA is key. Hopefully you can develop that trust so that you can have that, so you're comfortable sharing these things, right? So it's not like, well, eventually I'll let my CPA know, just because I barely meet with them. It's not like they can help me anyways. The key here is, well, my CPA is the one that is going to help me, that is actively structuring this thing for me so that I do this right. Let me just go in and check with him. I have this idea. Let me check tax wise if it makes sense to do it right now. So structuring and managing your finances that way will definitely help you and be beneficial if you have that, or if you're actively trying to get that relationship with your CPA. Okay. So overall, I want to talk a little bit about the types of clients, right? Usually you will fall under one of these three types generally. Okay, so the reactive client, number one. Okay, so shows up once a year. Okay, so by the way, if you're in here, don't feel bad. I'm just trying to get you to think how you may be in a situation where if you make a change, you will see the benefit. So sends documents late. Okay, they have to be chased around, they have to be looked, they have to be reminded. So all of this comes down to also the type of business that you're in, the cycle of the business that you're into. So all of these things will kind of play into how you the type of client that you might be. Okay, so hopefully your goal here is that if you're in a business that's starting out, that you're scarce of resources, you're trying to hire, but sometimes that's difficult. So I understand that that there's a component there of adjustment and understanding that it may be a situation that you're stuck with rather than you want to be in. But But all of this is organization, okay? If you, for example, if you're in a situation like this, call your CPA. You can call us, and we can see how we can help you kind of transition from that to, you know, hopefully another type of relationship that you're gonna see the benefits on, right? You know, ask how much do I owe, right? If you know that kind of off the bat, how much am I gonna pay? You know, no planning. So that's your number one client, okay? So number two is the one that is aware but inconsistent, okay? Knows that planning matters, okay? And the key here is the intent, right? So whereas in the client number one, where he's just kind of reacting, maybe unaware that there is another way. In this case, it's a little bit harder, or you know, it's maybe a little bit of a more complicated situation, because as a client, you're aware of the situation. So, you know, you're aware that the planning matters. Doesn't plan things through. Okay, it's aware, but you know, it's just actively making the decision to kind of bypass it and just go ahead and you know, talks about structure and doesn't implement. Right? It's kind of basically a situation where you're aware that you know that things, you know, should be working properly. Maybe you've had an experience in another job that you know that you have to make certain that you need to, before you make a decision, that you have to go through a process, but for whatever reason you're not, you know, you're skipping that part, right? So that's kind of like you know, they get some benefit but not the full result, right? And this is when, like, you know, you see the discomfort, right? You kind of go halfway, and you put some effort, but you know, maybe not enough, or don't follow through. And you know, and this one is maybe the hardest, right? Because even though some effort was put into it, it's hard to see that if only a little bit more was done in terms of kind of having that availability and having that relationship with your CPA, then it would have been more beneficial. Okay, so then there's the third type, which is, you know, best case, is the proactive client, right? It's basically the ideal situation. It's, you know, in this case, you're communicating throughout the year, okay? Keeps clean records, right? Whether it's, you know, hiring in-house, whether it's outsourcing to someone, but they're able to kind of have that proactive setup in their business where they have everything, they have things to date, right? So they're not waiting half a year, they're not waiting months, they're not waiting quarters. They just say, oh, I'll go back and I'll see what I did a couple months ago, or what I did last year, and worse, right? It's more of a proactive kind of planning and a setup, right? Makes decisions early, right? So you know, it's able to kind of that all of that kind of brings into that whole process where, you know, you're able to make quick decisions. Man, why? Because you have all the data, you have everything up to date. It puts you in a situation where like, if something makes sense, you talk to your CPA and gives it a go and says, like, look, you're gonna get that tax benefit, you can step right into it. Okay. Seeks guidance before acting. Obviously, what I just mentioned, right? Hey, call your CPA, call your financial advisor. Hey, I have this idea. Does it make sense? You know, worst case, I heard it in TikTok. I've heard it a couple of times. Does it make sense? Can you disclose that for me? So that's basically where you see the biggest difference, right? These are the guys that, you know, they kind of have the perfect situation. You see it at the end of the year, how satisfying it is that, you know, if you have that kind of relationship, if you go through that process, when it comes time to filing taxes, it's such a breathe. It's such a different. You know, it goes from having like something similar to having your wisdom teeth taken out procedure to, you know, a walk in the park and walk in the beach, because it's, you know, you've already done the hard work. You've already kind of, you know, gone through all the things that you need to do. At the end of the day, you're filing, everything, the work was done. It's just smooth sailing from there. And my point here is not to kind of judge into, you know, what type of client you are here. Here is more so that I can kind of walk you through a natural process, because it's very natural that if that not all of us have the type of background that will kind of give you that awareness, that understanding of how to start a business, right? So if you're in that situation, you may be on sort of a type 1 client, right? Where you're unaware of certain things. You've never set up a business before. You just kind of going out there and you're taking a risk. You want to do these things. Those things are normal. But the goal here is to go through that process where you become that type of client that is aware, that knows that kind of has that knowledge, right, of the alternative of not doing these things. That is all the headache, all the tax overpayments, all the sleepless nights, all the worry with getting IRS letters, and all that gets avoided. Okay. So, what is the biggest advantage of of doing it this way, of having that relationship with your CPA? Okay. So, the biggest advantage here, to just be completely blunt and honest with you, is not the strategy itself, because there are many strategies that you can put together. And some will have more impact than others. Also, there's ones that align more with the type of business that you may have, with the type of personality that you have. Maybe you're looking more into kind of some retirement, where you're looking at you're looking at the end game is decades from now. You don't mind putting some money aside as in retirement, because you don't kind of have that quick return mindset, right? But maybe you're in a situation where you're looking to have that, raise the business, sell it, start another one, right? Both are perfectly fine strategies, right? But each one will have its own strategy. But the key here is that what really carries more weight is, number one, is the timing, what I just mentioned, right? Number two is the structure. Okay. Number three, and last but not least, is consistency. When you put all these three things together, the chances of success, at least of avoiding problems and surprises, it raises. It increases tenfold, hundredfold. Okay. I've seen it with all my clients. I've seen it like in so many situations throughout the day, throughout the weeks. New clients, prospective clients, all of this kind of falls into those three key aspects. Okay, so again, that's timing, structure, and consistency. No matter what business you're in, if you're able to put those three together, the chances that you will have success in your business it's way higher. And one of the aspects that I've seen, besides the number, right? Because obviously and clearly that is important. But one aspect that is not spoken too much about, or maybe your CPA you might not mention, is also the psychological part of it, right? If you let me give you this example. If you set up a business and as part of the business you're thinking that it's gonna be this grandeur experience, right? Where it's all gonna be success, where it's just all gonna be making easy decisions, or it's gonna be smooth sailing. But it turns out that starting a business is a very difficult process. It's a complicated process. It takes energy, it takes resiliency, it takes hard work, and there's pretty much no way around that. I mean, unless you're very, very lucky, 9 out of 10 business owners will go through that process. But if you're able to put those three things together, the difference is that's a difference maker, right? But my point here, what I'm trying to say is that all of that process, all of the heartaches, all of the hard work, it may have an emotional impact, right? Where it could be like, look, it could be even a situation where it's like, okay, my numbers are good, my company is profitable, but I hate this. I don't like the decision making. I don't like the wearing different hats. I don't like, it's not for me. So, having, so it can have that kind of a psychological impact, right? That emotional kind of pushback, right? So, but having these three things, the timing, the structure, the consistency, can kind of help with those thoughts, right? With those like kind of difficulties, right? Those can never be underestimated. If you've ever been a business owner, you kind of know all of these things, how hard they can be, and then you will know that how being organized can really help kind of smooth out those those difficult parts which inevitably come in as a business, as any business cycle, right? So a CPA can guide the strategy, but the client has to execute it. You need to be you kind of have to have that other side. It's a complement, right? The CPA can only do so much. They can help you, they can assist you, they can advise you, but you as a client, you also have to be first willing to listen, and then you also have to be able to execute. Okay, so the next one is what I want to talk about is that relationship with your CPA, right? How relationships matter. Okay, so this is something that also a lot of people and business owners and CPAs will overlook, right? The best results don't come from a transaction. So from transactions, right? We, like, for example, here up from CPA, we try to avoid that transactional relationship, okay? So clearly that's sometimes inevitable. That's something that may come with the territory. Like, for example, there's times where it's actually very transactional, right? It's, this, I need to get this done. How much is it? Just get it done, and then we call it a day, right? So there's room for that. That also happens. But when it comes to when it comes to like the business, running your business, raising capital for your business, scaling your business, all of these things are key to having someone, a good CPA, a good strategist, a good financial advisor that can help you through that process. Because as I said earlier, those are major steps, and those are they will come with certain amount of difficulty and pushback and failures and things like that. That having good support, people that can guide you, that can help you, is gonna come very handy when those times comes, right? So from a relationship, you get ongoing communication, right? They should be part of that process. Ongoing communication, right? Having trust. I mentioned that earlier. Trusting your CPA, kind of having that two-way relationship, right? Where it's where you're able to at least be able to set up a time, right? And as I mentioned, because I've seen it from some clients, they call you out of the blue, and then they complain because you didn't answer the phone. But we all have to respect our time, right? So it's set up a meeting, right? It might be different if you call, because I've seen that too, where it's I try to call them, I leave messages, I email, they don't answer. So that's different. But if you're able to kind of establish that ongoing open channel of communication, it may not be immediate, but at least if you have some sort of system and process where you can have talk to each other, whether it's email, whether it's set up a meeting, whether it's just call and call me back, and I'm able in between meetings to call back, have a quick phone call before we discuss something major later. So that's another option, right? But having that trust it's key. Planning, as I mentioned, right? And real understanding of the business, right? So in those discussions with your CPA is how you not only you actively kind of develop that relationship, but it's where you kind of connect with the CPA in terms of what you're looking for in the business, right? I've seen it with many of my clients, right? As we're discussing things, we can kind of get the feeling from the client themselves. We kind of guide them into what they're thinking, so complement what they're thinking, but it really comes from what you yourself as the business owner, what you want to get out of this, not only out of the business, but out of that relationship with your CPA that can guide you get to your goals, right? Your CPA is probably not going to be able to create that goal for you. That's something that you should already have kind of ahead of time, or if you don't have it, maybe you're working to get to what that goal is, right? Because starting a business is just like any other thing, right? It has a beginning and it probably will have an end. So it's up to you to decide what you want to get out of it. And it's usually those things that, they come with a purpose as well. So, what do you want to get out of the business? What's the purpose? Is the purpose to, you just want to, see if it works? Do you have long-term goals? Do you have short-term goals? So all of those discussions with your CPA, besides the number, are really beneficial, so that that's sort of a complement with the numbers, with the financials, to have that kind of that open communication is very, very beneficial. Okay, I kind of walk you through sort of high level, right? The relationship that you should have. Not only relationship, it's also the process, right? It's the process, it's the communication, it's the mindset, it's the structure, it's the timing. You mentioned, if you notice, like I've kind of walked you through very subtle how each process ties. It's sort of like tied to each other, and how like when you combine them, it creates that, hopefully that fruitful relationship that is going to become key to at least to have some success into reaching your goals, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, it's, having a business can be a very, very difficult, tough, mentally tough and challenging process where it's it may come with more than you can chew, probably, right? So the key here is so that doesn't happen, so that you don't get to that place. You have the right support, you have the right structure, you have the right process. You will see the difference as a business owner, as someone that is very proactive, that is has very ambitious goals. All this is going to help you get to your goals. It's hard. It's sometimes hard to see as a CPA when someone has really good ideas about things that they want to try to achieve, but because they didn't have the right structure, they just couldn't get past that situation. Okay, so what we've seen consistently is that the outcomes, the clients that have the best outcomes, are the ones that treat their CPA as an advisor, not just as one that files their tax return. Okay, very, very key. Okay, timing, communication, all of that. Yeah, advisor versus preparer, advisor versus bookkeeper. Think of that as you talk to your CPA and as you develop that relationship. Okay, so if you ever feel frustrated during tax season, it might not just be about what happened, right? It might be about how the process that you have in place is and how it is set up. Okay, and that's something that you can change moving forward. This is not a problem that you have to get stuck with it. What I want to kind of walk you through today, hopefully I achieve some of that, is that all of this can be changed, either with you proactively trying to get with your CPA to see if it could be, the problem might be that you're not approachable enough, or it could be where your CPA it's not able to provide you that advisory service that you need. Then it might be time to change CPAs. So folks, I think that's about it for me today. Hopefully you have found this to be helpful. Here at Upfront CPA, we're very open channel communication with our clients. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can comment here on the comments below. If you have any questions, you feel free to reach out. Go to our website, book a consultation, and we will see you in the next for the next time. Thank you, everybody.